The man who had spent his entire life watching others get rich from opportunities he could never touch, opened his eyes on a cold spring morning and realized he had been given another chance. The first thing he felt was the smell of damp earth. The second thing he heard was the distant cry of a rooster. The third thing he noticed was the rough wooden ceiling above him, a ceiling he had not seen for more than 40 years. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then the memories came rushing back like a broken dam. The endless nights working until his hands cracked, the failed businesses, the betrayals from people he trusted. The regret of knowing that his greatest mistake was not being born without talent, but being born too late. He remembered the modern world, the towering buildings, the unstoppable rise of technology, and his own miserable ending after a lifetime of chasing opportunities that always slipped away. But now, he was lying in a small rural house. His body felt weak, his hands were thin. His clothes were old and patched. A voice from outside called his name, the voice of his mother. A voice he had not heard since he was a young man. His heart froze. Impossible. His mother had been gone for decades. Slowly he sat up and looked around the room. The cracked mirror, the faded blanket, the wooden table. Everything was exactly the same. Then his eyes landed on the old calendar hanging on the wall. The year that had been buried deep inside his memories. The year when he was still young. The year when his life had not yet been ruined by countless wrong choices. A normal person would have panicked, but he did not, because he understood one terrifying truth. He had returned to the past, and unlike everyone else, he carried the knowledge of the future. He knew which industries would explode. He knew which crops would become valuable. He knew which people would rise and which people would disappear. But most importantly, he knew he had been given something that no one else in this era possessed, a secret, a hidden farm. At first, he thought the strange golden light appearing inside his mind was only an illusion caused by his shock. But when he closed his eyes, he saw it clearly. A vast piece of land existed somewhere beyond normal reality. A mysterious farm filled with endless possibilities. The soil there was richer than any farmland on Earth. The water was cleaner than any spring. Plants grew at an impossible speed. And the most unbelievable thing was that anything grown there carried extraordinary quality. A simple vegetable from this farm was not the same as an ordinary vegetable. It was fresher, sweeter, more nutritious. The kind of food wealthy people in the future would pay enormous prices to obtain. In his previous life, he had searched everywhere for a chance to change his destiny. Now destiny had placed the greatest opportunity directly into his hands. But he knew better than anyone that opportunities alone did not create empires. Execution did. So he made a decision. He would start small, very small. Because in 1976, a poor young farmer suddenly becoming rich would attract attention. And attention was dangerous. The first thing he needed was money. Not millions, not even thousands. Just enough to create the first stone of his empire. The next morning, while everyone else was still struggling to survive, he walked toward the hidden farm inside his mind. He carefully picked a basket of vegetables. They looked ordinary. That was the terrifying part. No one would believe that such simple vegetables could change his fate. He returned to the village market carrying only one basket. One basket of vegetables, that was all. Many people looked at him with curiosity. Some laughed. They knew his family was poor. They knew he had no connections. They knew he had nothing except an empty stomach and a dream. A middle-aged woman picked up one vegetable and examined it. Is this really worth buying? The question sounded simple. But everyone nearby heard the doubt behind it. The young man smiled calmly. Try it first, the woman hesitated. Then she tasted a small piece. The expression on her face changed instantly. The crisp texture, the natural sweetness, the unforgettable flavor. It was something she had never experienced from ordinary farm produce. What kind of vegetable is this? The surrounding people became interested. Soon one person bought another, then another. Within an hour, the entire basket was empty. The money in his hand was not much. To others, it was only a small amount earned from selling vegetables. But to him, it was the first brick placed on the foundation of a future empire. Because he knew something others did not. The world was changing. The future would belong to those who could recognize value before everyone else. That night, while his family counted every coin carefully, he sat quietly in the corner. His mother thought he was worried. She did not know that he was planning a future nobody could imagine. A future where the small village everyone ignored would become the birthplace of a business empire. A future where the people who once looked down on him would have no choice but to remember his name. But building an empire in 1976 was not simple. Money was limited, resources were scarce, and the biggest obstacle was not poverty. It was trust. In this era, a young man suddenly selling perfect vegetables would attract suspicion. Some people would think he was lucky. Others would think he was hiding something. And there were always people who could not stand watching someone rise from nothing, especially someone they had already decided was worthless. A few days later, his success began to attract attention. The same villagers who once ignored him started asking questions. Where did these vegetables come from? Why were they different? Why did customers from nearby towns start searching for his produce? He gave simple answers. He smiled. He stayed humble. He never revealed the truth. Because the secret farm was not just a source of wealth. It was the key to everything. And he knew that if the wrong person discovered it, his second chance at life could disappear faster than the first. However, what he did not know was that his first basket of vegetables had already changed something much bigger. A businessman passing through the village had tasted one of his vegetables. That businessman had connections, money, influence, and a hunger for rare opportunities. When he heard that a poor young farmer was producing vegetables unlike anything else in the market, he became interested, very interested, because in the future, everyone would fight over rare resources. And this young farmer had unknowingly created the first example of something the world would desperately seek. The businessman arrived at the village with a simple question. Who is the person growing these vegetables? The villagers pointed toward the small wooden house at the edge of the farmland. The young man looked up and saw several strangers standing outside. He immediately understood. The peaceful beginning was over. His secret had started attracting predators. But instead of fear, a cold smile appeared on his face. In his previous life, he had been powerless. He had watched opportunities disappear because he lacked courage. He had trusted the wrong people. He had allowed others to decide his destiny. Not anymore. This time, he would control everything. This time, he would build something so powerful that nobody could destroy it. The era of his empire had begun. But before he could take the next step, he would have to face the first person who wanted to take advantage of his miracle. And this person had no idea that the poor farmer standing before him was not the same young man everyone remembered. He was a man who had already lived an entire lifetime. A man who had already lost everything once. A man who had returned with knowledge of the future. And a man who was prepared to make everyone who underestimated him regret it. The businessman standing before him looked like an ordinary merchant. But the young man who had returned from the future could see through him immediately. This was the kind of person he had met countless times in his previous life. A person who smelled opportunity and immediately wanted a piece of it. The businessman smiled warmly and stepped forward. Are you the one selling those vegetables? The young man nodded, yes. The businessman glanced at the empty fields behind him and then at the small wooden house. His eyes carried doubt. You are very young. Where did you learn to grow vegetables with such quality? A normal young farmer in 1976 would have become nervous. He might have explained too much. He might have desperately tried to prove himself. But the man standing there was no longer the inexperienced youth everyone remembered. He had spent decades in the future learning one painful lesson. The person who reveals all his cards first is usually the person who loses. So he simply smiled. Maybe I was lucky. A simple answer, a harmless answer. But the businessman's expression changed slightly. He expected excitement. He expected desperation. He expected a poor farmer to immediately beg for a partnership. Instead, he found someone calm, someone impossible to read. The businessman introduced himself as someone who transported agricultural products between villages and towns. He claimed he wanted to help. He said he could sell the vegetables in bigger markets. He promised that together they could earn much more money. To anyone else, this would have sounded like a blessing. But the young man knew the future. He knew how many people became rich by taking advantage of those who had something valuable but lacked experience. This businessman was not a villain, at least not yet. But he was not a savior either. He was someone looking for profit. And there was nothing wrong with that. The key was making sure the profit was controlled by the person who created the value. I appreciate your offer, the young man said calmly. But I am not looking for someone to sell my vegetables. The businessman was surprised. Then what are you looking for? The young man looked toward the distant mountains. I am looking for someone who understands long-term business. Those words made the businessman silent. A poor farmer talking about long-term business in 1976 sounded ridiculous, but something about his confidence made people hesitate. The businessman left that day. But he did not leave empty-handed. He carried a thought with him. This young farmer was different, very different. That night, inside the mysterious farm hidden beyond ordinary reality, the young man examined his next move. The secret farm was powerful, but relying only on selling vegetables would be foolish. A true empire was not built from one product. It was built from a system, production, distribution, brand, reputation, investment. He already knew the future trends. He knew that agriculture would gradually transform. He knew that quality food would become increasingly valuable. He knew that people would eventually pay huge amounts for products that were healthier and better than ordinary goods. The opportunity was enormous. But first, he needed a foundation: land, money, workers, and most importantly, a reputation that nobody could destroy. The next morning, instead of hiding his success, he made a surprising decision. He visited the poorest families in the village. The same families who struggled every year because their crops failed. The same families who had little hope. He offered them something unexpected: a partnership. He would provide better seeds and methods. They would help him grow more vegetables. The profits would be shared fairly. At first, everyone thought he was crazy. Why would someone with such valuable crops share his secret? Why would he help people who had nothing? But he understood something. An empire could not be built alone. In his previous life, he had tried to fight the world by himself. He had believed strength came from having everything under his own control. He was wrong. Real power came from creating a network of people who believed in the same future. Slowly, the first group joined him. Then another. Within weeks, the small farming operation that nobody cared about began changing. The fields became more organized. The harvest became larger. The quality remained impossible to match. And something even more important happened. The villagers who once laughed at him began respecting him. The same people who said he would never achieve anything now greeted him with admiration. But success always creates enemies, especially when it appears too quickly. A few wealthy merchants in nearby towns heard rumors. They heard about vegetables that could sell for much higher prices. They heard about a young farmer who refused to reveal his methods. And they became interested, not because they admired him, because they wanted control. One afternoon, several men arrived at the village. They were dressed well. They walked confidently. They carried themselves like people who were used to others obeying them. Their leader was a man named Zhang Wei, a businessman known for buying farmland cheaply from desperate farmers. He looked at the young man and smiled. "You are talented." The young man remained silent. "But talent needs support," Zhang Wei continued. "You are young. You do not understand the market. You do not understand how dangerous competition can be." The words sounded like advice, but the meaning was obvious. Submit, hand over control. Become someone else's tool. The young man looked at him quietly. In his previous life, this was exactly the kind of moment where he would have hesitated. He would have worried. He would have searched for compromise. But after living once already, he knew something important. Some people did not respect kindness. They only respected strength. "I understand the market better than you think," he replied. Zhang Wei laughed. "Yes." The young man stepped forward. "I understand that people who cannot create value usually try to control people who can." The smile disappeared from Zhang Wei's face. The villagers watching nearby held their breath. Nobody expected such a young farmer to speak this boldly. Zhang Wei stared at him. For the first time, he realized this was not a simple farmer. This was someone dangerous, someone with ambition, someone who refused to kneel. "Do you know what happens to people who challenge established businesses?" The young man smiled. Yes, his eyes became cold. "They create new businesses." The atmosphere became silent. Those words were simple, but they carried the confidence of someone who had already seen the rise and fall of countless companies. Zhang Wei left without another word, but before leaving, he looked back. There was no anger in his eyes, only calculation. The battle had begun. The young man knew that from this moment onward, selling vegetables was no longer just about earning money. It was about survival. His secret farm had given him an advantage. His knowledge of the future had given him direction. But now he needed something even greater. He needed to prove that a person from the lowest point of society could rise above everyone who looked down on him. Because this time, he was not chasing success. He was creating history. And the first chapter of his empire was about to begin. The arrival of Zhang Wei did not frighten him. Instead, it reminded him of the countless moments in his previous life when he had allowed powerful people to decide his fate. Back then, he had believed that connections were everything. Money was everything. Status was everything. But after returning to 1976, he finally understood the truth. The strongest person was not the one who started with the most resources. It was the one who could create resources from nothing. And right now, he had something Zhang Wei and every other businessman could never obtain: the knowledge of the future, the secret farm, and a second chance. However, he also knew that relying on those advantages alone would make him careless. The future had taught him a brutal lesson. A person who becomes rich too quickly often loses everything because they never learn how to protect their wealth. So instead of confronting Zhang Wei directly, he made a different move. He expanded quietly, carefully. The first thing he did was improve the farming methods of the villagers who joined him. He did not reveal the existence of the mysterious farm. Instead, he used his future knowledge to introduce techniques that would seem revolutionary in this era: better spacing between crops, improved soil preparation, more efficient irrigation. Simple ideas that ordinary farmers had never considered. To everyone else, it looked like he was just unusually talented. But the results shocked the entire village. The vegetables became even better. The harvest increased, and the number of customers continued growing. Soon, people from nearby towns began traveling just to buy his produce. At first, they came because they were curious. Then they came because they were addicted to the quality. The vegetables were no longer just food. They became a symbol. A symbol that there was a farmer in a forgotten village who could produce something beyond ordinary. And that was exactly what he wanted: a brand. Even before the concept became popular, he understood the power of reputation. In the future, countless companies would spend billions trying to build trust with customers. But he had discovered the foundation of that trust in the simplest way: give people something valuable, then make sure they remember where it came from. While others focused on quick profits, he focused on loyalty. And slowly the village began transforming. The same fields that once produced barely enough food for survival were becoming the foundation of something much bigger. But not everyone was happy. Zhang Wei watched from a distance. At first, he thought the young farmer would collapse under pressure. He expected him to panic after being threatened. He expected him to come begging for cooperation. But weeks passed. Nothing happened. The young man continued growing. Even worse, he was growing without Zhang Wei. That was something Zhang Wei could not accept. For years, he had built his influence by controlling desperate farmers. When people had no money, he offered loans. When crops failed, he bought land cheaply. When farmers had no choices, he became the only choice. But this young man was destroying that system. He was giving people another option. And people with options were much harder to control. One evening, Zhang Wei sat in his office, staring at the reports in his hands. The numbers were impossible. A small village farm had attracted customers who previously only purchased from established suppliers. A young man with no background had created demand without spending a single coin on advertising. "This cannot continue," Zhang Wei said coldly. His assistant lowered his head. "What should we do?" Zhang Wei tapped his fingers on the table. "We attack his weakness." Everyone had a weakness: money, family, reputation, fear. He believed the young farmer must have one, but what Zhang Wei did not understand was that he was dealing with someone who had already lost everything once. Threats no longer worked. Fear no longer worked. The young man had already experienced the worst possible ending: regret, failure. Compared to those things, Zhang Wei was nothing. A few days later, rumors began spreading. People started whispering that the young farmer's vegetables were suspicious. Some claimed they were unsafe. Others said he was using illegal methods. The rumors appeared suddenly. Too suddenly. Anyone with experience understood what was happening. Someone was trying to destroy his reputation. The villagers became nervous. After all, reputation was everything. One accusation could ruin years of hard work. But instead of defending himself emotionally, the young man remained calm. He had expected this. In fact, he had been waiting. Because in his previous life, he had learned another valuable lesson: when enemies attack you, do not only defend, counterattack. The next morning, he did something nobody expected. He invited everyone: customers, villagers, even merchants from nearby towns. He opened his farmland. Today, everyone can see exactly how these vegetables are grown. People were surprised. If he had something to hide, he would have refused. But he did the opposite. He showed everything: the fields, the workers, the process. Nothing seemed suspicious. Then he brought out the most important evidence: the customers who had purchased his vegetables before. One by one, they spoke. They talked about the taste, the quality, the difference. They were not paid actors. They were ordinary people. People who had experienced the product themselves. And that was something rumors could not defeat. By the end of the day, the whispers against him had disappeared. But Jiang Wei had lost something more valuable than money. He had lost credibility. Everyone now knew someone was trying to destroy a hard-working young farmer, and everyone knew who benefited from it: Jiang Wei. For the first time, the businessman felt pressure. The young farmer had not only survived his attack, he had turned it into an opportunity. The young man stood in his field that evening, watching the sunset. He knew this was only the beginning. The fight with Jiang Wei was not finished, but he was no longer a powerless farmer. He had built his first shield, a loyal customer base, a united group of farmers, and a reputation that was beginning to spread beyond the village. Now it was time to take the next step. The small basket of vegetables that started everything had become something much bigger. It had become the seed of an empire. And soon the world would learn that the most dangerous competitor was not the richest man. It was the man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The village that had once been forgotten by everyone was slowly becoming the center of attention. But the young man knew one thing clearly: attention was both a weapon and a trap. The more successful he became, the more eyes would turn toward him. Some eyes would admire, some eyes would envy, and some eyes would wait for the perfect moment to tear him down. That was why he could not remain a simple farmer anymore. The time had come to build something stronger, a real company, not just a source of income, an empire. In his previous life, he had watched countless businesses rise and collapse. He understood that the difference between a farmer and a business owner was not the product. It was the mindset a farmer produced. A businessman created systems, and systems were what allowed ordinary people to create extraordinary results. So, after careful consideration, he made his next move. He gathered the villagers who had joined him. Inside a simple wooden building, dozens of farmers sat quietly. Most of them had spent their entire lives working the land. They had never imagined sitting together to discuss something as grand as business. The young man looked at them. "You all know why I asked everyone to come here." The villagers nodded. They knew. The demand was growing faster than they could handle. Customers from nearby towns were arriving every day. Some even traveled long distances just to buy their vegetables. But their production was limited. If they continued like this, they would eventually lose customers. The young man continued. "We cannot continue thinking like individual farmers." Everyone listened carefully. "From today onward, we work together." A few people exchanged surprised looks. "Together?" "Yes, we create a farming organization." The villagers were stunned. In 1976, such an idea was almost unheard of among ordinary farmers. Most people only thought about surviving, growing enough crops, earning enough money, getting through another year. But this young man was thinking decades ahead. He explained his plan. The farmers would specialize. Some would focus on planting. Some would manage harvesting. Some would handle transportation. Some would maintain quality control. Everyone would have a role. Everyone would benefit. At first, some people were hesitant. Change was frightening, especially for people who had lived their entire lives following the same methods. But then one elderly farmer stood up. He looked at the young man and smiled. "I have farmed for 50 years. Everyone became quiet. I have never seen anyone think this way." He looked around at the other villagers. "Maybe it is time for us old farmers to learn something new." Those words changed everything. Slowly, the doubts disappeared. The villagers agreed. The foundation of the future empire had been created. A few days later, the young man officially established the first agricultural cooperative in the region. It was small, almost laughably small compared to the giant companies of the future. But every empire began with a first step, and this was his. Meanwhile, Jiang Wei was watching everything. The more he watched, the more uncomfortable he became. He had expected the young farmer to disappear. Instead, the young farmer became stronger. He had expected people to abandon him. Instead, more people followed him. He had expected weakness. Instead, he saw ambition. Finally, Jiang Wei decided he could no longer wait. If he could not control this young man, he would destroy him. But this time, he would not use rumors. He would use power. Jiang Wei contacted several suppliers in the area. His plan was simple: cut off the young farmer's resources. Without materials, without transportation, without connections, the business would collapse. At least, that was what he believed. But Jiang Wei made the same mistake every arrogant person made. He underestimated his opponent, because the young man had already predicted this move. In his previous life, he had seen many companies destroyed because they depended entirely on others. So from the beginning, he had prepared alternatives. He had built relationships with small suppliers. He had stored resources. He had created backup plans. While Jiang Wei was trying to close doors, the young man had already built new ones. When Jiang Wei's people refused to provide transportation, the young man simply purchased old carts and organized his own delivery system. When suppliers increased prices, he reduced dependence by creating local production. Every attack became an opportunity. Every obstacle became a stepping stone. For the first time, Jiang Wei realized something terrifying. This young man was not reacting to his moves. He was predicting them. And that meant one thing. He was facing someone far more experienced than his age suggested. One evening, Jiang Wei finally met him again. This time, the businessman no longer smiled. "You knew what I was going to do." The young man calmly poured tea. "I expected it." Jiang Wei narrowed his eyes. How the young man looked at him. "Because people like you always use the same methods." Those words struck harder than an insult. Because they were true. Jiang Wei had spent years relying on the same strategy. Control resources, control people, control the market. But this young man was changing the rules. "You think you have won?" Jiang Wei asked. "No." The young man shook his head. "This is only the beginning." The answer surprised him. Most people became arrogant after surviving an attack, but this young man was different. He was not celebrating, he was preparing. Because he knew the real battlefield was not the village. It was the entire country. The small basket of vegetables that started his journey was only the first chapter. Soon his products would enter bigger markets. Soon wealthy customers would search for his name. Soon competitors far stronger than Jiang Wei would appear. And when that happened, he would need more than a farm. He would need an empire. That night, inside the mysterious farm, he discovered something new. A hidden area that had not appeared before. A new section of land, a new ability, a new possibility. The secret farm was evolving, and with it, his ambition grew even larger. Because he finally understood. The farm was never meant to help him become rich. It was meant to help him change an entire era. But before he could unlock the next stage of his power, a new challenge appeared. A powerful businessman from the city had heard about the impossible vegetables from a small village. Unlike Jiang Wei, this person was not interested in stealing his success. He wanted to buy everything, including the secret behind it. And when the young man refused, the real battle for his empire would begin. The arrival of the businessman from the city changed everything. For months, the young farmer had been fighting against local competition. Jiang Wei, small merchants, jealous villagers. Those opponents were dangerous, but they were still limited. They only understood the world around them. But the man who had just arrived belonged to a completely different level. His name was Li Guoqiang, a wealthy businessman from the city, a man who had built his fortune through trade, transportation, and connections. Unlike Jiang Wei, who relied on intimidation, Li Guoqiang relied on influence. He did not need to threaten people. He simply had the power to make opportunities disappear. When he arrived at the village, everyone noticed his clothes, his vehicle, his confident expression. Everything about him showed that he came from a world far beyond this small farming area. The villagers watched nervously. They knew someone important had arrived, but they did not know why. The young man, however, already understood. This was the next stage of his journey. The small village was no longer his entire battlefield. The real competition had begun. Li Guoqiang walked through the farmland slowly. He touched the vegetables. He examined the soil. He observed the workers. Then he smiled. "I finally understand why everyone is talking about this place." The young man stood beside him calmly. "You are interested in the vegetables?" Li Guoqiang laughed. "Not just the vegetables." He looked directly into his eyes. "I am interested in the person who created them." A normal young farmer would have been excited. A powerful businessman showing interest was a dream opportunity. But the young man remained expressionless. Because he knew something. The more valuable something was, the more people would try to own it. Li Guoqiang continued. "You are wasting your talent here." "Yes." He pointed toward the small fields. "You have something that could make millions. But you are still thinking like a farmer." The words sounded flattering, but there was a hidden meaning. "You are talented, but you are small. You need someone like me." Li Guoqiang took out a document. "I want to invest." The villagers became excited. "Investment." money expansion. To them, this sounded like the answer to every problem. With city resources, their farm could grow 10 times faster. But the young man did not even look at the document. How much do you want? I only want 60%. The entire area became silent. 60%. Everyone understood what that meant. He was not offering help. He was offering ownership. The young man looked at him. So you want my company? Li Guocheng shook his head. No, I want to help you manage it. A cold smile appeared on the young man's face. That sentence, those exact words. He had heard them many times in his previous life. People always said they wanted to help, until the moment they owned everything. I appreciate your offer, but I refuse. The villagers froze. Even Li Guocheng looked surprised. You refuse? Yes. You understand what you are rejecting? The young man nodded. A shortcut. Li Guocheng stared at him. Most people would spend their entire lives searching for an opportunity like this. The young man calmly replied. And most people spend their entire lives depending on someone else. Those words made the businessman's expression become serious. For the first time, he stopped seeing him as a talented farmer. He saw him as a competitor. You think you can compete with city businesses? The young man looked toward the fields. A moment of silence, then he continued. I know I can. That confidence shocked everyone, because it was not arrogance. It was certainty. The meeting ended without agreement. Li Guoqiang left the village. But unlike Zhang Wei, he did not feel anger. He felt curiosity. He had met thousands of ambitious people, but very few had the courage to reject wealth when it was placed directly in front of them. This young man, Li Guoqiang, looked out of the window. He is either a genius or a fool, but deep inside he knew the answer. A fool could create luck once. A genius could create success repeatedly, and this young farmer had already done it many times. Meanwhile, inside the secret farm, the young man discovered something extraordinary. The hidden area that had appeared before finally opened. A new section of land appeared. But this time, it was different. The plants growing there were not ordinary vegetables. They were rare agricultural products that would only become valuable decades later. High-value plants, special ingredients, things that could create entirely new industries. The secret farm was giving him another advantage. But he did not immediately use it, because he understood patience. In his previous life, he had failed because he chased every opportunity without building a foundation. This time, he would move carefully, one step at a time. First dominate agriculture, then expand into food production, then create a complete business ecosystem. He would not simply become rich, he would become impossible to replace. However, while he was planning his future, Zhang Wei made his own move. After losing several battles, Zhang Wei finally realized something. He could not defeat the young farmer through normal methods. So he searched for someone stronger, someone who could crush this rising empire before it became unstoppable. And the person he found was connected to Li Guoqiang, two powerful businessmen, two different ambitions. One wanted to control the young farmer. The other wanted to destroy him. But neither understood the most important thing. They were no longer dealing with an ordinary young man. They were dealing with someone who had already watched the future unfold once. Someone who knew exactly how powerful businesses were built. And someone who had already decided his next move. The next time they met, he would no longer be defending his farm. He would begin his counterattack. Because an empire was not built by surviving attacks. It was built by making enemies realize they had chosen the wrong opponent. The young man knew that from the moment he rejected Li Guoqiang's offer, the peaceful days were over. Before, people only saw him as a talented farmer. Now they saw him as a threat. A person who refused to surrender his future. And that was something powerful people could never tolerate. Because a person with ambition could be controlled. But a person with ambition and independence was dangerous. Inside his small house that night, the young man sat quietly under the dim light of an oil lamp. The villagers thought he was celebrating. After all, he had defeated another challenge. He had refused a wealthy businessman. He had protected his ownership, but he was not celebrating. He was calculating. In his previous life, he had made one fatal mistake. He had focused too much on gaining opportunities, and not enough on protecting himself from enemies. This time would be different. He needed a stronger foundation, not just a farm, not just a business, a complete empire. The first step was establishing control over his supply chain. A person who controlled production but depended on others for everything else was still vulnerable. So he made another unexpected decision. He began building his own transportation network. At first, everyone thought he was crazy. A farmer buying vehicles? A farmer investing in logistics? It seemed impossible. But he knew the future. In the decades ahead, the strongest companies would not only control products, they would control the path those products traveled. Production, storage, transportation, distribution. Every part mattered. He started with the simplest solution: hiring local workers, purchasing old equipment, creating a small delivery team. The vehicles were not impressive. The roads were not good. The scale was tiny. But the idea was revolutionary. The farmers who worked with him began realizing something. They were no longer just growing vegetables. They were building a business. And that feeling changed everything. People who once only hoped to survive began thinking about the future. They began taking pride in their work. The village slowly transformed. But while his empire was growing from the ground up, his enemies were preparing their response. Jiang Wei and Li Guoqiang finally met. The two businessmen sat across from each other in a private room. Neither of them liked the situation. Jiang Wei hated losing control. Li Guoqiang hated being rejected. But they shared the same problem. The young farmer was becoming too powerful. He must be stopped early, Jiang Wei said. Li Guoqiang remained silent. Unlike Jiang Wei, he was more cautious. He is not an ordinary person, Jiang Wei frowned. Li Guoqiang looked at him. That is exactly why he is dangerous. Jiang Wei did not understand, but Li Guoqiang did. A businessman born into wealth had advantages, resources, experience. But someone who started with nothing and still succeeded, that person had something much harder to defeat: adaptability. They decided to test him one more time. Instead of attacking directly, they would offer him another opportunity: a bigger investment, a better deal, a chance to enter the city market. But hidden inside the offer was a trap. They wanted him to become dependent. They wanted him to believe he needed them. And once he accepted that idea, they would slowly take control. A few days later, the invitation arrived. The villagers became excited. This is your chance. Imagine selling in the city. You could become rich overnight. Everyone saw opportunity. But the young man saw danger. He studied the contract carefully. Every sentence, every condition, every hidden restriction. Then he smiled. They were clever, very clever. But they were not clever enough. Because they were trying to trap a person who had already seen countless business battles in the future. He knew every trick, every method, every hidden intention. Instead of rejecting the offer immediately, he did something unexpected. He accepted the meeting. The villagers were confused. Had he changed his mind? Had he finally decided to cooperate? No, he had a different plan. If his enemies wanted to play a game, he would play. But he would not play as a victim. He would play as the person controlling the board. When he arrived in the city, he saw something he had not expected. The market was much larger than he imagined. Thousands of merchants, hundreds of businesses, opportunities everywhere. This was exactly why he had wanted to leave the village eventually. The secret farm gave him extraordinary products. But the city would give him something equally important: a market. During the meeting, Li Guoqiang smiled confidently. "Young man, have you thought carefully?" "Yes." And the young man placed the contract back on the table. "I have a different proposal." Everyone in the room became silent. Li Guoqiang raised an eyebrow. "A different proposal?" "Yes." The young man looked directly at him. "You do not invest in my business." The room froze. Li Guoqiang's expression changed. "Then what do you suggest?" The young man slowly spoke. "You become my distributor." For several seconds, nobody said anything, because the meaning was clear. He was not asking for support. He was offering a partnership where he remained in control. A poor farmer from a small village was telling a wealthy businessman from the city how their relationship should work. It sounded absurd, but the confidence in his voice made everyone listen. Li Guoqiang studied him carefully. "You believe you can command the market?" The young man smiled. "No. I believe I can create something the market cannot ignore." That answer changed the atmosphere. Because for the first time, Li Guoqiang understood. This young man was not chasing money. He was building influence, and influence was far more valuable. However, before Li Guoqiang could respond, another piece of news arrived. A major company from the capital had heard about the mysterious vegetables. They were preparing to enter the competition. A company with enormous resources. A company capable of crushing small businesses overnight. The young man looked at the message calmly. The first battle was against local merchants. The second battle was against wealthy businessmen. Now the real giants had arrived. But instead of fear, he felt excitement. Because this was the moment he had been waiting for. the moment when his small farm would finally step onto a much larger stage. The basket of vegetables that started his journey was no longer just a product. It was the beginning of a revolution. And the world was about to discover that the most terrifying competitor was not the richest. It was the one who knew the future. The arrival of the capital company was the moment everyone had been waiting for. For the villagers, it was frightening. For the merchants in the city, it was exciting. For the young man who had returned from the future, it was inevitable, because he knew that a small business could never remain unnoticed forever. The moment a product became valuable enough, larger forces would appear. That was the rule of every market. Weak businesses disappeared. Strong businesses adapted. And the young man had no intention of disappearing. The company from the capital was called Hua Xin Agricultural Group. In 1976, it was already one of the most influential agricultural enterprises in the region. They had money. They had factories. They had government connections. They had thousands of workers. Compared to them, his farming organization looked like a tiny candle standing in front of the sun. But he knew something that others did not. A giant company could have power. But power without innovation was just a slow-moving machine, and machines could be defeated. The first meeting between them happened in the city. The young man entered a large office building. For the villagers, this place represented an unreachable world, a world of wealthy businessmen and important figures. But as he walked through the doors, he felt no pressure, because in his previous life, he had entered places far more impressive. He had attended meetings with executives. He had negotiated with investors. He had watched companies worth billions rise and fall. The building was different. The era was different. But human nature remained the same. Inside the meeting room, several executives were waiting. At the center sat the president of Wasin Agricultural Group, a middle-aged man named Chen Rong. He looked at the young farmer for several seconds. Then he smiled. "So you are the person behind those vegetables?" The young man nodded. "Yes." Chen Rong leaned back. "I must admit I am impressed." The room became quiet. Nobody expected praise. Most people would have assumed the giant company came to crush the newcomer. But Chen Rong was not foolish. He understood the value of recognizing talent. "You created something special," Chen Rong continued, "but you made one mistake." The young man looked at him. "What mistake?" "You attracted attention before you were ready." A normal person might have felt insulted. But the young man understood. There was truth in those words. Growing too quickly created risks. Chen Rong placed a document on the table. "This is an acquisition proposal." The executives looked confident. They believed this was the end. A small farmer could not refuse. The offer was generous. More money than he had ever seen. Enough to make his family comfortable for generations. But the young man barely glanced at it. The room froze. Chen Rong's smile disappeared slightly. "You should at least read it." "I do not need to." "Why?" The young man calmly answered. "Because you are not buying my farm. You are buying my future." Silence. Those words changed the entire atmosphere. Because everyone understood. This was not about vegetables. It was about control. If he accepted the offer, he would gain money. But he would lose the one thing that mattered most. The ability to decide his own path. Chen Rong looked at him carefully. "You are very confident for someone with so little." The young man smiled. "And you are very confident for someone who needs what I created." The executives became uncomfortable. Nobody had spoken to Chen Rong like this before. But instead of becoming angry, Chen Rong laughed. A genuine laugh. "You really are interesting." He stood up. "Most people see a mountain and think about climbing it." He looked at the young man. "You see a mountain and think about building a road through it." The young man said nothing, because he knew the conversation was not finished. Chen Rong sat down again. "If you refuse acquisition, then what do you want?" The young man answered immediately, "Distribution." Everyone looked surprised. Again, he was not asking for investment. He was not asking for protection. He wanted access to the market. He wanted Huaxin's network. But he wanted to remain independent. Chen Rong narrowed his eyes. "You want us to help you compete against us?" "Yes." The answer was so direct that nobody knew how to respond. But the young man continued. "In the future, customers will not only care about quantity. They will care about quality. They will pay more for better products. The company that understands this first will control the market." Those words sounded strange in 1976, but they carried undeniable logic. Chen Rong had spent decades in business. He understood trends. He understood that society was changing, and he realized something. This young man was not thinking about today's market. He was thinking about tomorrow's world. Finally, Chen Rong made a decision. Not an agreement, not yet, but a test. I will give you 1 month. The young man looked at him. 1 month to prove that your vegetables can survive the city market. If you succeed, we discuss cooperation. If you fail, Chen Rong smiled. Then you will understand why small businesses need large companies. The challenge was accepted. The battle had begun. The young man returned to the village and immediately started preparing. The next 30 days would determine whether his small farm could enter the national market. But he was not worried, because unlike his competitors, he knew what customers would want decades later. He knew how brands were built. He knew how trust was created. And most importantly, he knew that the secret farm still had countless hidden abilities waiting to be unlocked. That night, when he entered the mysterious space again, something changed. The land expanded. A new area appeared. But this time, it was not filled with crops. It was filled with structures, a storage facility, a processing area, a place where raw products could become finished goods. The secret farm was no longer just helping him grow vegetables. It was helping him build an entire industrial chain. The young man looked at the new facilities. Then he smiled, because he finally understood. The farm was not a gift to make him rich. It was a blueprint for an empire. Meanwhile, in the city, Chen Rong looked at the information about him. For the first time in years, the powerful businessman felt something unfamiliar: excitement. Because he realized this young farmer might not be someone he could acquire. He might be someone he had to compete with. And if that was true, the agricultural world was about to change forever. The 30-day challenge from Huashan Agricultural Group had officially begun. For any ordinary farmer, this would have been an impossible battle. A small rural farming organization was about to enter the city market and compete against companies that had spent decades building connections and reputation. One mistake, one disappointed customer, and everything could collapse. But the young man did not see this as a crisis. He saw it as an examination. The market was not asking whether he was lucky. It was asking whether he had the ability to create something that could survive. And he was ready to answer. The first thing he did after returning to the village was change the way everyone thought about their products. Before this moment, the villagers believed they were selling vegetables. But the young man gathered everyone together and said something that surprised them. We are not selling vegetables. The farmers looked confused. Then what are we selling? He picked up one of the vegetables from the field. Trust. The villagers became silent. He continued. A customer can buy vegetables anywhere. They can buy cheaper vegetables. They can buy larger quantities. But if they believe our products are different, they will choose us even when others offer lower prices. Those words completely changed their perspective. For decades, farmers had competed by producing more land, more crops, more quantity. But this young man was teaching them something from the future. The true battlefield was not production. It was value. Inside the secret farm, he began experimenting with the new facilities that had appeared. The storage area allowed him to preserve freshness far longer than normal methods. The processing area allowed him to create products that did not exist in this era. He did not rush. He knew that revealing too much too quickly would create suspicion. Instead, he chose one simple strategy. Dominate one product first. Become unforgettable. The first shipment to the city was prepared. Hundreds of kilograms of vegetables. Carefully selected, carefully packaged. Every detail was considered. Even the packaging itself was different. In 1976, most agricultural products were sold without any identity. A product was just a product. But he created something new: a name, a symbol, a promise. Every basket carried the same message: quality from the countryside. At first, many merchants laughed. A farmer putting a name on vegetables? Does he think vegetables are luxury goods? They did not understand. Because they were thinking about today. He was thinking about tomorrow. When the shipment arrived at the city market, many merchants ignored it. They believed established suppliers were safer. They believed a young farmer could not compete. But then the first customers arrived. A wealthy family purchased some vegetables. They cooked them that evening, and the next morning they returned. I want more. The merchant was surprised. More, yes, the vegetables from yesterday. They taste different. Soon more customers tried them. Then more. Word spread, not through advertising, not through money, through experience. Within days, the city market started talking about the mysterious rural vegetables. A product that tasted like nothing people had eaten before. A product that reminded them of the natural flavors they thought had disappeared. The Huaxin executives watched the numbers carefully. They expected failure. Instead, sales continued increasing. Chen Rong looked at the reports on his desk. The results were impossible. A small unknown supplier had created demand in a market dominated by established companies. His assistant asked quietly, "Should we continue the cooperation test?" Chen Rong remained silent for a long time. Then he answered yes, but increased the difficulty. The assistant was surprised. Why? Chen Rong looked at the report. Because if he succeeds too easily, he will never know his true ability. Meanwhile, the young man understood something was happening. The challenge was not simply about selling vegetables. It was about proving whether his vision could survive outside his village. And he knew the next stage would be harder, because competitors had started noticing. The city merchants who once ignored him were now watching. The suppliers who once dismissed him were now curious, and Zhang Wei was becoming desperate. After losing repeatedly, Zhang Wei made his final move. He used his connections to spread another wave of attacks. This time, he did not target the vegetables. He targeted the person behind them. Rumors appeared. Questions about his background. Questions about his methods. Questions about where such extraordinary products came from. Zhang Wei believed that if he could not destroy the product, he would destroy the reputation of the person creating it. But once again, he underestimated his opponent. Because the young man had already prepared, he organized a public inspection. Farm experts, merchants, customers, everyone was invited. The fields were opened. The process was shown. Nothing was hidden, and the result shocked everyone. The more people investigated, the stronger his reputation became. The rumors that were supposed to destroy him became free publicity. People who had never heard of his farm became curious. People who were curious became customers, and customers became supporters. Zhang Wei watched everything collapse. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. The young farmer was not just defending himself anymore. He was using every attack to grow stronger. That was the most terrifying kind of opponent. Someone who became stronger because of obstacles. Meanwhile, the 30-day deadline was approaching. Chen Rong personally visited the city market. He wanted to see the results with his own eyes. He stood among ordinary customers and watched them choose the vegetables. He listened to their conversations. He watched their expressions. Then he finally understood. This was not just about farming. This young man had created a brand before most people even understood what branding meant. When the 30 days ended, Chen Rong invited him back to the company. The meeting room was different this time. The attitude was different. Before, they looked at him as a small farmer seeking opportunity. Now they looked at him as a rising competitor. Chen Rong placed a new contract on the table. This time, the offer is different. The young man looked at it. What changed? Chen Rong smiled. Before, I wanted to buy your future. Now I want to become part of it. The young man looked at the contract. A partnership, not ownership. Respect, not control. But before he could answer, a messenger rushed into the room. His face was pale. Something happened. Everyone turned. The government announced a major agricultural reform. The entire market structure is about to change. The young man's eyes narrowed. He knew this moment, a major turning point in history. A wave of change was coming. And anyone who moved first would gain an advantage that others could never recover from. The secret farm had given him the first opportunity. The city market had proven his ability. Now the real era of expansion was about to begin. Because building a successful farm was only the beginning. He was about to build an empire that would reshape agriculture itself. The announcement of the agricultural reform changed the entire atmosphere overnight. For ordinary farmers, it was uncertainty. For merchants, it was danger. For the young man who had returned from the future, it was the beginning of the era he had been waiting for. Because he knew what most people did not. The biggest fortunes were not made when everything was stable. They were made when the old system collapsed and a new one was born. Those who understood the direction of change would rise. Those who refused to adapt would disappear. And this time, he had already seen the future. Inside the meeting room, everyone was discussing the reform. Executives from Huaxin Agricultural Group were worried. Their previous advantages came from old structures, their connections, their control over distribution, their established relationships. But reforms meant competition would become more open. New businesses would appear. New opportunities would emerge. The comfortable world they had built would no longer be guaranteed. Chen Rong looked at the young man. You seem unusually calm. The young man looked at the documents on the table. Because this is not a crisis. Chen Rong frowned. Then a door. Everyone became silent. The young man continued. Most people will only see what they are losing, but smart people will see what has become possible. Those words made Chen Rong think deeply. For decades, he had built his company by understanding the existing market. But this young farmer was looking beyond the current market. He was looking at what came after. The young man immediately returned to the village. The others expected him to slow down. Instead, he accelerated. He gathered the farmers again. This time, he did not talk about vegetables. He talked about the future. The old way of farming is ending. The villagers looked nervous. Many feared change. They had spent their entire lives following familiar methods, but the young man continued. This is our chance. If we move now, we will not follow the market. We will lead it. He announced a new plan. The cooperative would no longer focus only on growing crops. It would become a complete agricultural enterprise. Production, processing, storage, transportation, sales, every part would be connected. The villagers were shocked. Such ambition seemed impossible, but they had already seen what he had achieved. The basket of vegetables that once seemed meaningless had become a business supplying an entire city. So this time they believed him. The first major investment was the processing facility. In the future, he knew processed food would become a massive industry. Fresh products had limits, but processed products could reach more people. They could last longer. They could create stronger brands. Inside the secret farm, he discovered even more possibilities. The mysterious space had begun responding to his ambition. New technologies, new agricultural knowledge, new resources. It was as if the farm itself understood that he was no longer just trying to survive. He was trying to change the world. But while he was expanding, his enemies were collapsing. Jiang Wei's situation became worse every day. His old methods no longer worked. Farmers who once depended on him now had alternatives. Customers who once trusted him now questioned his reputation. Business partners who once followed him began looking toward the rising agricultural company from the village. The person he once considered insignificant had become the biggest obstacle in his path. Desperate, Jiang Wei made his final gamble. He decided to attack the foundation of everything, the cooperative. If he could break the relationship between the young man and the farmers, everything would collapse. He spread rumors among the villagers. He told them the young man was becoming too powerful, that one day he would take everything, that the farmers were only temporary workers. Some people believed him. After all, fear was powerful. Even loyal people could become uncertain. When the young man heard about the rumors, he did not become angry. Instead, he called everyone together. The entire village gathered. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone waited for him to defend himself. But he did something unexpected. He admitted something. I am ambitious. Silence. I want to build a company. I want to become successful. I want this village to become stronger. His honesty shocked everyone. He did not pretend to be humble. He did not pretend he had no ambition. Then he looked at the farmers. But the question is, will you become weaker because I succeed? Or will you become stronger because we succeed together? Nobody answered, because everyone knew the truth. Since joining him, their lives had changed. Their income had increased. Their work had gained meaning. Their children had more opportunities. The young man continued. I do not need people who follow me because they are afraid. I need partners who walk with me because they believe in the future. Those words destroyed Jiang Wei's final attack, because fear could control people temporarily. But trust created loyalty, and loyalty was something money could not buy. That evening, the villagers officially rejected Jiang Wei's influence. For the first time, the businessman who had controlled farmers for years lost his power completely. Meanwhile, in the city, Chenrong received the latest business report. The numbers were unbelievable. The young agricultural company was expanding faster than expected. More importantly, the customers were not just buying products. They were recognizing the brand. Chenrong smiled. He finally understood. This young man was not building a farm. He was building an empire. A few months earlier, everyone thought the impossible vegetables were only a lucky accident. Now nobody could deny the truth. A new agricultural giant was rising. But just as everything seemed to be moving perfectly, a new message arrived. A foreign company had entered the market. A company with technology far beyond anything available locally. They had seen the success of the young man's products, and they wanted to challenge him. This opponent was different. They did not underestimate him. They studied him. They prepared. And for the first time since his rebirth, the young man faced an enemy who knew exactly how dangerous he was. He looked at the information quietly. Then he smiled. Because this was the battle he had truly been waiting for. Not a fight against people protecting the past, but a fight against people trying to control the future. And this time he would not just defend his empire. He would make the entire world remember his name. The arrival of the foreign company marked the beginning of a completely different battle. Until now, the young man had fought against people who underestimated him. Zhang Wei believed he was just a lucky farmer. Local merchants believed he was only temporarily successful. Even some powerful businessmen believed his rise was too small to threaten them. But this opponent was different. They did not laugh. They did not underestimate. They studied, they analyzed. They prepared. And that made them far more dangerous. The company was called Greenfield International, a global agricultural corporation with advanced technology, modern farming methods, and decades of experience in international markets. When their representatives arrived, they did not come with threats. They came with confidence. Because they believed the difference between them and the young farmer was too large to overcome. Their leader, Michael Anderson, was a sharp businessman. He had built his career by entering developing markets and defeating local competitors. He understood one simple principle. A small company could have passion. A large company had resources. And resources usually won. The first meeting happened in the city. Michael looked at the young man sitting across from him. He did not see a farmer. He saw a competitor. That alone showed how far the young man had already climbed. "You have created something impressive," Michael said. The young man remained calm. "Thank you. But you must understand something." Michael placed several documents on the table. The agricultural industry is changing. Technology, efficiency, large-scale production. These are the future. The young man looked at the documents. He understood immediately. Greenfield was not trying to buy him. They were trying to convince him that his way was outdated. They wanted him to believe that tradition could never defeat technology. A common mistake, because technology was powerful. But technology without understanding people was incomplete. The young man smiled. "You are right." Michael was slightly surprised. "Yes, the future belongs to technology." The room became quiet. Michael smiled. "Then you understand why cooperation with us is your best choice." But the young man continued. "However, the future also belongs to those who know how to use technology correctly." Michael's expression changed because he realized something. The young man was not rejecting technology. He was preparing to surpass it. The young man continued, "Machines can increase production. Data can improve decisions. Science can create better methods. But none of those things matter if you do not understand the customer." Michael stared at him. Those words were simple, but they carried a level of business understanding far beyond this era. The foreign company had technology, but the young man had something equally valuable, a vision of where the world was going. The meeting ended without agreement, but this time nobody considered it a victory. The real competition had begun. Back at the village, the young man made his next move. He opened the secret farm. The mysterious land had changed again. New sections had appeared, not just farmland, research areas, experimental zones, places where he could test ideas that would not exist in the outside world for decades. For the first time, he began using the farm not only for production, but for innovation. He experimented with new varieties, improved cultivation methods, better preservation techniques. Every discovery gave him another advantage. But he was careful. He never revealed everything. A true empire was not built by showing everyone all your power. It was built by controlling when and where you revealed it. Soon, Greenfield International launched its first attack. They flooded the market with cheaper products. Their strategy was simple: destroy his advantage. If customers only cared about price, quality would no longer matter. Many people became worried. The villagers panicked. How can we compete? They have factories. They have machines. They have money. The young man listened quietly. Then he said something unexpected. "We do not compete with them." Everyone looked confused. "We changed the battlefield." He understood something important. A smaller company should never fight a larger company in the area where the larger company was strongest. Greenfield controlled quantity, so he would not compete in quantity. They controlled technology, so he would not compete in technology alone. He would create something they could not copy: trust. Quality, identity. He launched a new campaign. Instead of selling products as ordinary agricultural goods, he introduced them as premium products with a story. Products created by farmers. Products connected to nature. Products people could trust. At first, many thought this strategy was strange. But slowly, something unexpected happened. Customers started choosing his products even when they cost more. Why? Because they believed in them. The foreign company had products. He had a relationship with customers. And that difference changed everything. Meanwhile, Michael Anderson watched the sales reports. The numbers were confusing. Their products were cheaper. Their technology was better. Their production was larger. Yet customers continued choosing the small agricultural brand. For the first time, Michael encountered an opponent he could not defeat through normal methods. This man? Michael looked at the report. He understands the future, but he still had one more card. A card powerful enough to change everything. Greenfield announced a massive investment project. They planned to build the largest agricultural facility in the region. A project designed to completely dominate the market. The news spread quickly. Everyone became nervous. The villagers looked toward their leader. Was this the end? The young man looked at the announcement, then he smiled. Because he knew something nobody else knew. Large companies always believed bigger meant stronger. But sometimes, the biggest weakness of giants was their size. They moved slowly. They could not change quickly. They could not adapt easily. And the young man had spent his entire second life preparing for moments exactly like this. He gathered his team. A new plan was about to begin, not a defensive plan, an offensive one. For years, he had been building quietly. Now it was time to reveal the true power behind the secret farm. The world thought he was just a farmer with extraordinary vegetables. They were about to discover the truth. He was not building a farm. He was building an agricultural empire capable of challenging giants. And the next move would decide who truly owned the future. The announcement of Greenfield International's massive agricultural facility shook the entire market. For ordinary people, it was a terrifying piece of news. A foreign corporation with enormous capital was entering the battlefield. A company with advanced equipment. A company with experienced experts. A company that could spend more money in one day than his entire organization had earned since its creation. Many people believed the outcome was already decided. A small village enterprise could not possibly defeat an international giant. But the young man did not see an enemy. He saw a test. Because throughout history, every empire faced the same question. Could it survive when a stronger force appeared? A weak foundation collapsed. A strong foundation became unbreakable. And he knew his foundation was stronger than anyone imagined. That night, he entered the secret farm. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed something different. The entire space seemed alive. The soil shimmered faintly. The air carried a strange energy. The farm that had once only provided extraordinary crops had evolved into something far greater. A voice echoed inside his mind. Not a human voice, not an ordinary sound, a cold mechanical notification from the mysterious farm. The development stage had advanced. New functions were unlocked: agricultural analysis, genetic improvement, resource optimization, industrial production support. The young man stood silently. In his previous life, he had spent decades searching for opportunities. He had invested. He had studied. He had failed. He had watched others discover breakthroughs years before him. But now this impossible advantage was finally revealing its true potential. The secret farm was not just a place where special crops grew. It was a complete agricultural revolution hidden inside a small space. However, he did not become excited. He knew power could destroy people who lacked discipline. Many people failed after gaining opportunities because they became arrogant. He would not make that mistake. The secret farm was a weapon, and a weapon was only valuable when controlled properly. The next morning, he gathered his core team. Unlike before, he did not announce expansion. He announced transformation. We will stop competing as farmers. The room became quiet. We will become creators. The villagers looked confused. The young man continued. Greenfield wants to defeat us by producing more. So we will not fight them in production. They want to win through technology. So we will not chase their technology. A farmer asked, "Then how do we win?" The young man looked at everyone. "We create something they cannot buy." What? Our own future. Those words became the beginning of the next stage. Instead of increasing quantity, he focused on uniqueness. The secret farm helped him develop crops with qualities nobody had seen before. Longer freshness, better taste, higher nutritional value, natural resistance, features that would not become common for decades. But he knew something important. If he released everything at once, people would become suspicious. So he chose one product, a single crop, a product that would become the symbol of his empire. The first batch was sent to the city. When merchants saw it, they laughed. It is just another vegetable. They had seen hundreds of products before. They believed marketing could not change reality. But then customers tried it, and everything changed. The first customer bought one, then returned the next day, then brought friends. Soon the product became impossible to ignore. People were not buying because it was cheap. They were buying because it was different. That was something Greenfield could not easily copy, because they understood farming. But they did not understand the emotional connection between people and food. Meanwhile, Greenfield continued its aggressive expansion. They built factories, they increased supply, they lowered prices. They expected the small company to collapse under pressure. But instead, something unexpected happened. The cheaper Greenfield products entered the market, and the premium products from the young man continued growing. The two companies were no longer competing for the same customers. One sold quantity, the other sold value. For the first time, Greenfield realized their strategy had failed. They had tried to crush a competitor. Instead, they had helped create a completely new market. Michael Anderson looked at the latest report. His expression was serious. "This is impossible," his assistant asked. "Should we reduce prices further?" Michael shook his head. "No." "Why?" "Because we are no longer fighting a small company." He looked at the data. "We are fighting a brand." That was the moment he finally understood. The young man had done something far more difficult than creating a good product. He had created belief, and belief was the strongest advantage in business. Back in the village, the young man received another piece of news. Jiang Wei had disappeared from the agricultural market. Li Guoqiang had officially signed a cooperation agreement. Huaxin Agricultural Group had become his largest distribution partner. The local merchants who once laughed at him were now asking for opportunities to work together. The same people who once ignored him now wanted a place inside his growing empire. But he did not celebrate, because he knew the higher a person climbed, the stronger the storms became. And the next storm was already approaching. A mysterious organization had appeared. They were not competitors. They were investors. They had studied his growth. They knew about the impossible quality of his products. And they wanted something far more valuable than ownership. They wanted the secret behind his success. The young man looked at the information in his hands. For the first time since his rebirth, he felt a real sense of danger. Because these people were different. They were not trying to defeat his company. They were trying to uncover the hidden power behind it, the secret farm, the one thing that could never be exposed. He closed the document. The battle had entered a new stage. Before, he fought to build an empire. Now he had to protect one. Because sometimes the greatest threat to a rising empire was not the enemy standing in front of you. It was the enemy searching for the secret hidden behind your success. The mysterious organization appearing behind the scenes was unlike any opponent the young man had faced before. Jiang Wei wanted control. Li Guoqiang wanted profit. Greenfield International wanted market dominance. But these people, they wanted the source. They were not interested in buying vegetables. They were not interested in competing in business. They were interested in discovering the impossible secret that allowed a small rural farmer to create products beyond the limits of this era. And that made them the most dangerous enemy yet. The young man sat quietly in his office, looking at the information in front of him. The organization was called Aurora Capital, a name that seemed harmless. But behind that name was a network of powerful investors, researchers, and businessmen. They had invested in countless industries, technology, manufacturing, agriculture, energy. They had one habit. They never chased ordinary opportunities. They searched for things that could change the future. And now they had found him. The young man closed the document. He was not afraid, but he became more cautious because he understood one important thing. A secret was not valuable because it existed. A secret was valuable because nobody else knew it. The moment everyone discovered the existence of the secret farm, his greatest advantage would disappear. So from that day onward, he changed everything. The management of the company became more professional. Information was separated. No single person knew the entire process. The farmers only knew their own responsibilities. The transportation team only handled deliveries. The processing workers only handled production. The true source of the extraordinary quality remained hidden. To outsiders, it looked like a normal but highly successful agricultural company, exactly what he wanted. A strong empire did not depend on one person. It depended on systems. Aurora Capital began its investigation. Their first move was simple. They sent people to observe. They studied the farms. They interviewed workers. They analyzed products. They searched for weaknesses. But every investigation gave them the same answer. Nothing was unusual. The methods appeared normal. The farms appeared normal. The workers appeared normal. Yet the results were impossible. The more they investigated, the more confused they became. Inside Aurora Capital's headquarters, several executives gathered. A researcher placed a report on the table. We have analyzed the products repeatedly, and there is no clear explanation. The room became silent. How can there be no explanation? The researcher hesitated. That is the problem. The products are not violating any known scientific principles. They are simply far beyond current standards. The executives exchanged looks. For the first time, they realized something. They were not chasing a business secret. They were chasing a future technology. And whoever controlled it would control an entire industry. Back in the village, the young man continued expanding. He did not slow down because of the threat. Instead, he accelerated, because he understood another truth. The best way to protect a secret was not always to hide. Sometimes, it was to become too powerful to attack. He began entering new industries: food processing, agricultural research, distribution networks. Each step made his empire stronger. Each step made it harder for anyone to destroy him. Soon his company was no longer known as a successful farm. It became known as a rising agricultural corporation, a name that merchants respected, a name that customers trusted, a name that competitors feared. But the young man knew the most important battle was still coming, because Aurora Capital finally made contact, not through threats, not through pressure, through an invitation, a private meeting. The location was a luxury hotel in the city. When he arrived, he saw several unfamiliar faces. Among them was a woman named Elena. She was the representative of Aurora Capital. Unlike previous opponents, she did not pretend. She immediately spoke the truth. "We know you are hiding something." The young man remained calm. "Everyone hides something." Elena smiled. "True. But most secrets do not create products that change an entire industry." The atmosphere became tense. She continued. "We do not want to destroy you. We want to cooperate." The young man looked at her. "And if I refuse?" Elena was silent for a moment. Then she answered honestly, "Then we become competitors." That honesty surprised him. At least she was not pretending to be his friend. The young man leaned back. "What exactly do you want?" Elena placed a folder on the table. "A partnership, a research agreement, access to your technology." There it was. The real goal. They did not want his company. They wanted the source of his advantage. The young man looked at the folder, then he pushed it back. "No." Everyone in the room became still. Elena looked surprised. "You rejected before reading the proposal?" "Yes." "Why?" The young man looked directly at her. "Because you are not asking for cooperation. You are asking me to hand over the reason I exist." Those words created silence, because they revealed something important. He understood his own value. He understood that the secret farm was not merely a tool. It was the foundation of everything. Elena studied him carefully. Then she smiled. "Now I understand." The young man frowned slightly. "What?" "You are not protecting a business. You are protecting a vision." For the first time, someone had described him correctly. Not a farmer, not an entrepreneur, not simply a businessman. A person trying to reshape the future. But before the meeting ended, Elena revealed something unexpected. Aurora Capital already knew there was something unusual about his success, but they did not know the truth. They only had suspicions, however. Someone inside his own company had started providing information. The young man's expression changed. A traitor. Someone close. Someone who knew enough to become dangerous. The battle had changed. The enemy was no longer outside the walls. It was already inside. That night, he returned to the secret farm. For the first time, he looked at the endless fields and felt a different kind of pressure. Building an empire was difficult, but protecting one was even harder, because the greatest danger was not always the person trying to take everything from you. Sometimes it was the person standing beside you, waiting for the perfect moment to betray you. And now, he had to find the traitor before the secret farm was exposed. The discovery of a traitor inside his own company was the first time the young man felt a real threat since his rebirth. Not because he was afraid of losing money, not because he was afraid of losing status, but because he understood one terrifying truth. An enemy outside the walls could be blocked. An enemy inside the walls could open the gates. The empire he had spent years building was still young. The systems were strong. The reputation was growing. But the foundation was still made of people. And people were unpredictable. That night he did not sleep. He sat alone inside his office, reviewing every piece of information. Who had access to confidential documents? Who knew about the unusual production methods? Who had contact with outsiders? He did not rush to accuse anyone. That was the mistake inexperienced leaders made. They acted on emotion. They created panic. They destroyed trust. He would do the opposite. He would observe. He would wait. And he would let the traitor reveal themselves. The next morning, he called his most trusted managers together. Everyone expected anger. Instead, he simply announced a new internal restructuring. From today onward, the company will enter a new stage. The employees listened carefully. Every department will become independent. Information will be separated. No one person will control everything. Some people were confused. Others understood immediately. The young leader was strengthening the company, but hidden inside this change was another purpose. A test, a trap. If someone was secretly sending information outside, the new structure would reveal exactly where the leaks came from. The first few days passed quietly. Nothing happened. The young man continued expanding the company. New markets opened. New customers appeared. The agricultural empire continued growing. But behind the scenes, he was watching. Every movement, every conversation, every unusual action. Then, one evening, the first clue appeared. A confidential report about future expansion plans appeared in the hands of Aurora Capital. A report that only 3 people had seen. The young man looked at the document. He did not become angry. Instead, he smiled because now he knew the traitor had moved. And that meant the hunter had finally found the target. He checked the 3 names. The first was an old manager who had worked with him since the beginning. A loyal farmer who had supported him when nobody believed in his dream. The second was a young accountant responsible for finances. The third was someone he never expected, his own business assistant. The person who had followed him from the earliest days. The person who knew his habits. The person who understood his plans better than most people. For a moment, he remained silent. In his previous life, betrayal was something he understood too well. He had trusted people. He had given opportunities. And those same people had taken advantage of him. But this time he refused to let emotions control him. He needed proof, not suspicion. The next day, he gave each of the 3 people different versions of a future expansion plan. One document suggested entering the food processing industry. Another suggested expanding internationally. The third suggested developing a new agricultural research center. Then he waited. Within 1 week, Aurora Capital received information about the international expansion plan. The answer was clear. The traitor had been identified, his assistant, the person closest to him, the person everyone trusted. When the young man finally called him into the office, the assistant already knew. He entered quietly. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, the young man asked why. The assistant lowered his head. I needed money, a simple answer. But behind those words was a complicated story. His family had debts. His situation had become difficult. Aurora Capital offered him a fortune. The young man listened without interruption. Because he understood something. Not everyone betrayed others because they were evil. Some betrayed because they were weak. But weakness could still destroy an empire. You helped build this company, the young man said. The assistant's eyes became red. I know, then why destroy it? The assistant looked down. Because I thought this company would eventually belong to people like Aurora Capital anyway. That sentence revealed everything. He did not believe in the future. He believed only in power, and that was why he failed to understand the young man. The young man stood up. You made one mistake. The assistant looked at him. You thought this empire was built by money. It was not. It was built by people who believed. The assistant had no answer. The young man could have destroyed him. He could have exposed him. He could have made sure nobody ever trusted him again. But instead, he made a different choice. The assistant was removed from his position. The betrayal was handled quietly. Because a leader did not need revenge for every enemy. Sometimes the strongest punishment was simply removing someone from the future they could have shared. However, the young man knew this was only the beginning. The assistant was only a small piece. The real opponent was Aurora Capital. And now Aurora Capital knew something important. Their investigation had failed, but their suspicion had become stronger. They realized the young man was protecting something far greater than ordinary agricultural techniques. So they changed strategy. Instead of searching for the secret farm, they would force him to reveal it. They began attacking from multiple directions. Investment pressure, market competition, recruiting his employees, offering huge salaries to his researchers. They wanted to weaken the empire from within, but they underestimated one thing. The young man had already experienced an entire lifetime. He knew the future of business. He knew that companies did not collapse because of external enemies. They collapsed because of internal weakness. So he had already prepared. He created stronger loyalty systems, better benefits for employees, clearer opportunities for growth. He turned workers into partners, and slowly Aurora Capital realized something frightening. Every attack they launched made his company stronger. The more pressure they applied, the more united his people became. For the first time, Aurora Capital faced an opponent they could not easily defeat, a person who understood not only business, but human nature. Then, just as the conflict reached its peak, a new opportunity appeared, a chance to take his empire beyond national borders. A foreign market had discovered his products. International customers wanted them. But expanding globally meant one thing. The secret farm would face its greatest test. Because the larger his empire became, the harder it would be to hide the impossible source behind his success. The young man stood inside the secret farm, looking across the endless fields. He knew the path ahead would be more dangerous than anything before. But he also knew something else. He had not returned to the past to live quietly. He had returned to rewrite history, and now, history was finally beginning to notice him. The decision to enter the international market was the most dangerous move the young man had ever made. Not because he doubted his products, not because he doubted his ability, but because he understood one unavoidable truth. The moment his company crossed national borders, the secret farm would no longer be protected by distance. More people would investigate, more competitors would appear, more powerful organizations would search for the source of his impossible success. But staying small was no longer an option. A person who wanted to build an empire could not hide forever. So he chose to step forward. The first international opportunity came from a group of overseas distributors who had tasted his products through business connections. At first, they thought the vegetables were simply high-quality agricultural products. But after testing them repeatedly, their attitude changed. They discovered something strange. The quality remained stable. The freshness lasted longer than normal. The taste was unlike anything they had encountered from ordinary farming. They wanted more. Much more. The young man understood immediately. This was not just an export opportunity. This was the beginning of global recognition. However, he refused to make the same mistake many companies made, expanding too quickly. A weak foundation could destroy even the greatest opportunity. So instead of sending massive amounts of products overseas immediately, he created a careful strategy. The first step was reputation. He needed international customers to trust his brand before they trusted his products. He created a story about farmers, a story about quality, a story about a small village that created something extraordinary. In the future, companies would spend enormous amounts of money trying to create emotional connections with customers. But he understood this principle decades earlier. People did not only buy products, they bought meaning. And slowly his brand began appearing in foreign markets. The reaction was unexpected. Customers were fascinated by the idea that a small agricultural company from a rural area could compete with established international corporations. The story itself became powerful. Meanwhile, Aurora Capital watched everything carefully. Their previous strategies had failed. They could not steal his employees. They could not break his reputation. They could not discover the secret farm. Now they faced a difficult decision: continue fighting or change their approach. Eventually, Aurora Capital's leader made a surprising choice. They requested another meeting. This time, they did not come as enemies. They came as potential partners. The young man entered the meeting room and saw Elena waiting. She looked different from before. Less confident, more serious. "You have changed the market," she said. The young man remained silent. Elena continued. "When we first investigated you, we thought you were hiding a technology. But we were wrong." The young man looked at her. "Then what do you think now?" She answered honestly. "You are the technology." For the first time, the young man was surprised, because those words showed that she finally understood. His greatest advantage was not the secret farm. It was his ability to think differently, his understanding of the future, his ability to see opportunities before others. Elena placed a new proposal on the table. Not an acquisition, a strategic alliance. "We want to invest in your global expansion." The young man studied her carefully. In the past, he would have immediately rejected. But experience had taught him another lesson. Not every powerful person was an enemy. Sometimes the strongest move was not fighting everyone. Sometimes it was choosing the right allies. However, he still had one condition. My company remains independent. Elena nodded. We expected that, and the secret behind your products? She paused. We will not ask. That answer surprised him. Because it meant Aurora Capital had finally accepted something important. Some things could not be bought. The agreement was signed. For the first time, a former enemy became a partner. And this partnership created something nobody expected. A farming company from a small village began competing on the world stage. But while everyone focused on his success, the young man was preparing for an even bigger challenge. He knew the future. He knew that international markets were only the beginning. The true battlefield would eventually be technology, food security, agricultural innovation, the industries that would define the next century. Inside the secret farm, another transformation occurred. The land expanded once again. This time, a new area appeared, a place that looked completely different from ordinary farmland, a research facility, a place where knowledge from the future could be developed. The young man stood there quietly. For years, he had wondered how far the secret farm could take him. Now he finally understood. There was no limit. The farm had not been helping him become a wealthy farmer. It had been guiding him towards something much larger, a civilization-level agricultural system, a force capable of changing how humanity produced food. But with greater power came greater danger. Because the moment he unlocked the new research capabilities, something happened. A signal appeared. Not from his company, not from Aurora Capital, not from any known competitor. A hidden organization had detected unusual agricultural developments, an organization far older and more powerful than anyone he had faced. They had been watching, waiting, and now they had confirmed something. The impossible products were not an accident. Someone in this era possessed technology that should not exist. The young man stared at the message inside the secret farm. For the first time since returning to 1976, he felt the weight of his own advantage, because he finally understood. He was not the only person changing history. There were others searching for the same future, and some of them were willing to do anything to obtain it. The small basket of vegetables that started his journey had become the foundation of a global empire. But now, the battle was no longer about business. It was about who would control the future of agriculture itself. And the young man knew one thing. He had already lost once in his previous life. He would not lose again. Not to competitors, not to powerful organizations, not to anyone, because this time he was prepared. The signal appearing inside the secret farm changed everything. For years, the young man believed his greatest challenge was building an empire. He fought against greedy merchants. He defeated powerful businessmen. He survived attacks from international corporations. He turned a small village farm into a company recognized across borders. But now he finally understood. The business world was only the first battlefield. There was a much larger game happening behind the scenes. A game involving knowledge, technology, and the future of humanity itself. Inside the mysterious research facility that had appeared within the secret farm, a strange message continued glowing. It was not a warning. It was not an attack. It was an invitation. A hidden system had detected that his development had reached a certain level. A level where the secret farm no longer considered him merely a user, but a true successor. The young man stood silently. A successor? Those words confused him, because until now he thought the secret farm was simply an extraordinary opportunity given to him after rebirth. A miracle. A gift. But perhaps it was something much older. Something created with a purpose. He explored the newly unlocked research facility. Unlike the farmland, this place did not focus on growing crops. It contained knowledge, thousands of agricultural theories, advanced cultivation methods, information about ecosystems, methods that would only become possible decades later. It was like holding the agricultural achievements of the future inside his hands. But one section remained locked, a section labeled with a simple message: humanity's final agricultural challenge. The young man stared at those words. He understood immediately. The secret farm was not designed only to create wealth. It was designed to solve problems, problems that would appear in the future: food shortages, environmental damage, limited resources. The future world he remembered was advanced, but it was also full of crises. And now he had the ability to change that future. However, he also knew something important. Changing history was dangerous. A small action could create a huge consequence. He could not simply release future technology without considering the impact. So he made a decision. He would not reveal everything. He would introduce changes gradually, step by step, the same way he built his empire. Meanwhile, the mysterious organization finally revealed itself. They were called Genesis Foundation. Unlike Aurora Capital, they were not a normal investment group. They had existed for decades. Their members included scientists, researchers, and influential figures from different countries. Their purpose was simple: to collect technologies that could reshape civilization. When their representative arrived, the young man immediately noticed something. They were different from every opponent before. They did not underestimate him. They did not try to control him. They treated him as an equal. The representative was an elderly scientist named Dr. William Carter. He looked at the young man with curiosity. "You have something that should not exist in this era." The young man remained calm. "Many people say that," William smiled, "but most of them are wrong." He looked around. "Your achievements are impossible to explain through normal methods." The young man said nothing, because silence was the strongest answer. William continued, "We do not want your company. We do not want your money. We want to understand what you are." That sentence revealed their true intention. They were not chasing his products. They were chasing the mystery behind him. The young man looked at the scientist. "And if I refuse?" William did not threaten him. Instead, he answered honestly. "Then history continues." The answer surprised him. "No pressure, just acceptance." William continued, "But understand one thing. The moment you started changing agriculture, you also changed the future. People will notice. Some will support you. Some will fear you. And some will try to destroy you." The young man understood, because that was exactly what had happened. Every time he grew stronger, stronger opponents appeared. But he also learned something. Powerful enemies were not always obstacles. Sometimes they were proof that he was moving in the right direction. After the meeting ended, William left behind one final message. If you truly want to change the future, prepare yourself, because the future will come looking for you. Those words remained in the young man's mind. That night he returned to the secret farm. He stood among the endless fields, the same fields that once gave him one basket of vegetables, the same basket that started everything. Back then, he only wanted a better life. Then he wanted wealth. Then he wanted an empire. Now he wanted something greater. He wanted to create a future where people would not suffer from the same problems he had witnessed. The next morning, he announced the biggest project in his company's history: the Future Agriculture Initiative, a project focused on creating sustainable farming systems, not just for profit, but for humanity. The world reacted immediately. Some praised him, some questioned him, some feared him, but everyone agreed on one thing. The young farmer who once stood in a village market selling one basket of vegetables had become someone capable of influencing the future of agriculture. However, while the world watched his rise, another problem appeared, a problem even he could not predict. The secret farm began changing again. But this time it was not unlocking a new ability. It was showing him a vision of the future, a future where his empire existed, a future where his technology had changed the world, but also a future where everything he built had collapsed. The young man stared at the scene in shock. His company was gone. His partners were gone. His empire had fallen. And at the center of the destruction was his own decision. For the first time since his rebirth, he saw a future he could not control. A future where even success could lead to failure. The secret farm had shown him power. Now it was showing him responsibility. And the greatest battle of his life was about to begin. The vision inside the secret farm was the first thing in his second life that truly frightened him. Not because he saw enemies, not because he saw destruction, but because he saw himself, standing in the middle of a ruined empire. The company he built with his own hands was gone. The farms that once stretched across the land had disappeared. The people who once trusted him were no longer there. And the most terrifying part was not the collapse itself. It was the reason behind it. The future he saw was not destroyed by Zhang Wei, not by Greenfield International, not by Aurora Capital, not by any external enemy. It was destroyed by a decision he made, a decision he had not even made yet. The young man opened his eyes and stood inside the secret farm. For several minutes, he remained completely silent. In his previous life, he had failed because of bad luck, because of betrayal, because of missed opportunities. But this was different. This time he had everything. Knowledge of the future, a powerful company, loyal partners, an impossible advantage. Yet the future still showed him failure. That meant one thing. Power alone was not enough. A person could build an empire and still destroy it with his own hands. He walked through the endless fields, thinking carefully. The old version of himself would have chased even greater power, more money, more influence, more control. But the man who had lived once before understood something deeper. An empire that depended on one person was not an empire. It was only a fragile dream. So the next morning, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He slowed down. For the first time in years, he refused to expand. The executives were confused. The market was growing. Opportunities were everywhere. Why stop now? Are we afraid of competition? The young man shook his head. No. Then why? He looked at everyone. Because growth without stability is just another way to fail. Those words changed the direction of the entire company. Instead of chasing more markets, he focused on strengthening the foundation. He improved management systems. He trained future leaders. He created independent departments. He made sure the company could survive even if he disappeared. This was something he had never done in his previous life. Before, he believed he had to personally control everything. Now he understood. A true leader did not create followers. A true leader created people capable of continuing the mission. Meanwhile, the mysterious future vision continued appearing. Every time he entered the secret farm, he saw small pieces of the possible future. Sometimes his empire became stronger. Sometimes it collapsed. The difference was always the same: his choices. The secret farm was not showing him destiny. It was showing him possibilities. And that realization changed everything. The farm was not predicting the future. It was warning him. One day, while studying the research facility, he discovered something hidden: a record. An old message from whoever created the secret farm. The message was not long, but every word carried enormous meaning. The greatest agricultural system is not the one that produces the most. The greatest system is the one that allows humanity to continue. The young man stared at the message. For the first time, he understood the true purpose of the secret farm. It was never designed to create the richest person. It was designed to create someone capable of carrying responsibility. The farm did not choose him because he wanted wealth. It chose him because he had experienced loss, because he knew the cost of failure, because he understood regret, and because he had been given another chance. But this revelation also created a new problem. If the secret farm had existed for such a purpose, then someone must have used it before. Someone else had carried this responsibility. And somewhere inside the hidden facility, there were records of previous successors. The young man searched deeper, and eventually he found something impossible: a list of eras, different countries, different people, all connected to the secret farm. Some had succeeded, some had disappeared, some had created great achievements, others had failed completely. But every single one had faced the same final challenge: the temptation to use unlimited power. The young man closed the record. Now he understood. The greatest enemy was never outside. It was always inside. The desire to become unstoppable. The desire to control everything. The desire to believe that because you could change the world, you had the right to control it. That night, he made a promise. He would not become another failed successor. He would not build an empire based on fear. He would not create a world where people depended on him. Instead, he would build something stronger. A system that could continue without him. A future where his success belonged not only to himself, but to everyone who helped create it. However, just as he made that decision, a new crisis appeared. A major food shortage began affecting several regions. Governments started searching for solutions. International organizations began looking toward agricultural innovators. And suddenly, the entire world turned toward his company. The small farm that once sold one basket of vegetables was now being asked to solve a global problem. The pressure was enormous. If he succeeded, his company would become one of the most influential agricultural forces in history. If he failed, the future vision inside the secret farm might become reality. The young man looked toward the horizon. Years ago, he only wanted to change his own fate. Now the fate of countless people was connected to his choices. The true test of his rebirth had finally arrived. Not whether he could become rich, not whether he could defeat his enemies, but whether he was worthy of the power he had received. The global food crisis arrived faster than anyone expected. At first, it was only a few reports: a region experiencing poor harvests, a sudden increase in food prices, a shortage of essential agricultural products. Most people believed it was temporary, a normal fluctuation, a problem that governments and large corporations could solve. But the young man knew better, because he had lived through the future once. He remembered the hidden dangers beneath the progress of civilization. population growth, environmental damage, limited farmland, the endless struggle between human demand and natural resources. The world had always believed food would be unlimited, until the moment it was not. And now, the crisis that he once only remembered from history books had arrived years earlier, because his actions had already changed the timeline. The young man stood inside his office, looking at the latest reports. Countries were searching for solutions. Major corporations were fighting for control of agricultural resources. Some companies were raising prices. Others were storing supplies to profit from the shortage. Everyone was thinking about money, but he was thinking about something else. People were hungry. That was the difference between him and the competitors he had defeated before. For others, agriculture was a business. For him, it was responsibility. He gathered the leadership team. Everyone expected a strategy focused on profit. Instead, he announced something unexpected. We will reduce our profit. The room became silent. Several executives looked shocked. Reduce profit at the exact moment when demand was reaching its highest point? One executive stood up. Chairman, this crisis is our biggest opportunity. The young man looked at him. No, it is our biggest test. The executive remained silent. The young man continued. If we use this situation only to become richer, then we are no different from the people who caused the problem. Those words changed the atmosphere, because everyone realized something. Their leader was not thinking like an ordinary businessman. He was thinking about legacy. The plan was announced. The company would increase production. But instead of maximizing prices, they would create stable supply channels. They would help struggling regions. They would provide agricultural technology. They would teach farmers better methods. Many people thought he was making a mistake. Investors questioned him. Competitors mocked him. They believed kindness was weakness. But the young man understood something they did not. Trust was the most valuable resource in the world. Money could buy factories. Money could buy equipment. Money could buy influence. But money could not buy the loyalty of millions of people. Soon the world began noticing. While other companies fought over shortages, his company was solving them. While others searched for maximum profit, his company created stability. The same people who once doubted him started changing their opinions. Governments contacted him. Organizations requested cooperation. Farmers from different countries wanted to learn from his methods. The small village company had become something much larger, a global agricultural force. But success always attracted attention, especially from those who believed they deserved control. Aurora Capital watched carefully. Greenfield International watched carefully. And behind them, the Genesis Foundation watched most carefully. Because they understood something. The young man was no longer simply using the secret farm. He was fulfilling its purpose. And that made him more valuable than ever. One evening, Dr. William Carter visited him again. This time, the old scientist looked different. Less like an investigator. More like someone carrying a burden. You finally reached this stage. The young man looked at him. What stage? William looked toward the fields outside. The stage where your choices affect millions of lives. The young man remained silent. William continued. Most previous successors failed here. That sentence caught his attention. Why? The scientist sighed. Because power changes people. They begin by wanting to save the world. Then they start believing only they can save it. The young man understood. That was exactly the danger the secret farm had warned him about. The difference between a protector and a ruler was very small. A person could begin with good intentions and slowly become someone who controlled everything. William handed him an old document. This belonged to the previous successor. The young man opened it. Inside was the record of another person who had possessed the secret farm. A genius, a visionary. Someone who had created incredible agricultural achievements. But eventually, that person failed. The reason was written in one sentence. He believed humanity needed his guidance more than its own freedom. The young man closed the document. He finally understood the final challenge. The secret farm did not test intelligence. It did not test ambition. It tested restraint. Could someone hold unlimited power and still choose not to dominate? That night, he entered the secret farm. The hidden research facility was brighter than ever before. A new message appeared. The final stage was approaching. The farm had one final capability to unlock. A capability that could change the future forever. But before unlocking it, the system required one answer. Not about science. Not about business. Not about technology. A question about his belief. What kind of future did he want to create? A future controlled by one powerful person? or a future where humanity could stand stronger together. The young man stared at the message. He thought about his first life, his failures, his regrets, his lonely struggle. Then he thought about this life, his family, his workers, the farmers who trusted him, the people who depended on his choices. Slowly, he placed his hand on the system and made his decision. The final evolution of the secret farm began. But at that exact moment, something happened that shocked him. A warning appeared, not from the secret farm, not from an enemy. From the future itself, the timeline he had changed was collapsing. And the reason was him. Because by saving the world from one crisis, he had accidentally created another. A crisis far greater than food shortages. A crisis that threatened the entire future he had worked so hard to build. The young man looked at the warning. For the first time in years, he did not know the answer. And that was when he realized. The hardest battle was not against enemies. It was against the consequences of changing destiny. The warning from the future remained suspended inside the secret farm. A cold mechanical voice repeated the same message. The timeline was becoming unstable. The changes created by his actions had exceeded the original path of history. The young man stood motionless. For years, he believed knowing the future was his greatest advantage. Now he finally understood the hidden cost. The future was not a fixed road. It was a fragile balance. Every decision created a new possibility. Every opportunity created a new consequence. When he first returned to 1976, he only wanted to avoid his past failures. He wanted money. He wanted success. He wanted to prove himself. But along the way, his ambitions had grown. He built a company. He changed agriculture. He influenced millions of lives. And now the world itself was reacting to those changes. Inside the secret farm, another message appeared. The system did not tell him what to do. It only showed him possibilities. One future showed a world where his technology solved hunger, a world where agriculture became sustainable, a world where people had access to better food. But another future showed something different. A future where his company became too powerful, where governments depended on him, where farmers no longer made their own choices, where one person's decisions controlled the survival of millions. The young man finally understood the true danger. The problem was not whether he could save the world. The problem was whether the world would still belong to everyone after he saved it. That night, he made his most difficult decision. He would not release the full power of the secret farm. Not yet. Instead, he would divide the knowledge. He would share methods. He would teach people. He would create systems that allowed others to grow. The future should not depend on one person. It should depend on humanity itself. The next morning, he announced a new direction for his empire. Many expected another revolutionary product, another impossible invention. Instead, he announced something unexpected. The company would establish agricultural education centers. They would train farmers, share technology, improve farming methods across different regions. Some investors were disappointed. They wanted exclusive control. They wanted a monopoly. But the young man refused, because he had finally learned the lesson hidden inside the secret farm. The greatest empire was not the one that owned everything. It was the one that made everyone stronger. At first, many people questioned his decision. Why share knowledge? Why create future competitors? Why make it easier for others to succeed? But slowly the results appeared. Farmers became more productive. Communities became stronger. New agricultural businesses emerged. And instead of losing influence, his company gained something far more valuable. Respect. The world began seeing him differently. Not as a businessman, not as a powerful figure, but as someone who changed the direction of agriculture itself. Meanwhile, the secret farm continued evolving. The final locked area finally opened. Inside was not gold, not endless resources, not a weapon. It was a library, a collection of knowledge from countless civilizations, agricultural discoveries, environmental solutions, methods created by people from different eras. The young man looked at the endless information. Then he understood. The secret farm had never been a machine for creating wealth. It was a bridge connecting human knowledge across time, and he was only one person carrying it forward. Then the final message appeared. The successor evaluation was complete. The young man waited. He expected another ability, another reward. Instead, the system showed a simple sentence. You have chosen not to become the owner of the future. You have chosen to become its guardian. For the first time, the young man smiled, because that was exactly what he wanted. Not to control history, but to improve it. However, before he could fully understand the final meaning, another signal appeared, a signal from the future. But this time, It was not a warning. It was a message. A message sent from a timeline where his empire had survived. A timeline where humanity had overcome its greatest challenges. And at the end of that message was one name, his own. The young man stared at it in disbelief. Because the future was not showing him a failure anymore. It was showing him a possibility. A possibility created by the choices he had made. The same choices that once threatened to destroy everything had become the reason the future survived. Years ago, he sold one basket of vegetables in a small village market. Nobody noticed. Nobody believed that moment mattered. But that single basket became the first seed. The seed of a company, the seed of a revolution, the seed of a new era. And now, standing inside the secret farm, he finally understood. The greatest achievement was never becoming the richest person. It was creating a world where future generations could build something even greater. The young man looked toward the endless fields. The fields that started everything. The fields that gave him a second life. Then he walked forward. Because his journey was not ending. It was entering a new chapter. A chapter where he would no longer build an empire for himself. He would build a future for everyone. The world did not change overnight. True revolutions rarely did. They began quietly. A single idea, a single decision, a single person refusing to follow the path everyone expected. Years ago, that person was a young farmer standing in a village market with one basket of vegetables. Nobody saw greatness. Nobody saw an empire. Nobody saw the future. But that small moment had become the beginning of something that would reshape agriculture forever. Now, decades later, the name of his company was known across the world. The village that once struggled with poverty had become a symbol of innovation. The farmers who once worried about surviving each season had become leaders teaching others. And the young man who once returned to the past with nothing had become someone history would never forget. But despite everything he had achieved, he never forgot the first lesson. Power was temporary. Trust was everything. That belief shaped every decision he made. While other companies expanded by absorbing competitors, his company expanded by creating opportunities. While others tried to control resources, he built systems that allowed people to create their own success. And slowly the world began changing. The agricultural industry was no longer controlled only by the largest corporations. Small farmers gained access to better technology. Communities became more independent. Food production became more sustainable. The future he once feared was slowly becoming the future he wanted. However, the greatest challenge was not building the empire. It was protecting the original purpose. As the company grew larger, younger executives began joining. Many of them were talented, ambitious, intelligent, but some began thinking differently. They saw the company's power. They saw its influence. They saw the enormous profits possible if they controlled everything. One day, during a major board meeting, a young executive presented a proposal. If we acquire all major agricultural suppliers, we can dominate the entire market. The room became quiet. The proposal was logical, profitable, powerful, a strategy many companies would accept immediately. But the founder of the empire looked at the young executive and asked, "Then what happens to the farmers?" The executive hesitated. "They become part of our system." The old man smiled slightly. A system, that was the word. The same word that had destroyed many great organizations. Because there was a difference between creating a system that helped people and creating a system that controlled them. He rejected the proposal. Some people disagreed. Some investors questioned his decision. They believed he was too idealistic. They believed businesses existed to maximize power. But he knew better. He had already seen a future where too much control destroyed everything. The greatest danger to an empire was not losing power. It was forgetting why the empire was created. Meanwhile, inside the secret farm, one final mystery remained. The future message he received years earlier was still incomplete. It showed a world where his achievements survived, but it did not explain what happened after that. One night, the secret farm activated again. The entire space changed. The endless fields became brighter. The research facility opened deeper sections, and for the first time, the system showed him the complete history, not just previous successors, not just previous failures, but the origin. The secret farm was created centuries ago by a group of people who understood one thing. Humanity's greatest challenge was never the lack of resources. It was the inability to use resources wisely. They created the farm as a tool, not for kings, not for conquerors, not for the richest people, but for someone who understood responsibility, someone who had experienced loss, someone who knew that power without wisdom was dangerous. And now the young man finally understood why he had been chosen. Not because he was the smartest, not because he was the strongest, but because he had failed once. Failure had given him something success never could: humility. He remembered his first life, the mistakes, the regrets, the moments when he wished he could start again. And now he had, not only to become rich, not only to build an empire, but to become someone worthy of the second chance. The final message appeared. The greatest harvest is not what grows from the soil. It is what grows within people. The young man looked across the fields, the same fields that had once seemed impossible, the same fields that started with one basket of vegetables. Then he smiled, because he finally understood. The secret farm was never the reason for his success. It was only the opportunity. The real reason was every choice he made after receiving it, every person he trusted, every risk he accepted, every moment he chose creation over destruction. Years later, when historians wrote about the rise of the agricultural empire, they did not begin with the technology. They did not begin with the investments. They did not begin with the powerful partnerships. They began with a simple story: a young man, a forgotten village, and one basket of vegetables. Because sometimes the greatest empires do not begin with armies. They begin with a single seed,